I didn't expect the silence to hurt more than the shouting. When I told my parents they couldn't move into the house I had just bought, my mom didn't argue, didn't cry. She just stared at me like I had become someone she didn't recognize. My dad shook his head once, slow and disappointed, like I'd failed some invisible test I didn't even know I was taking. 3 days later, my sister stopped answering my calls. My aunt posted something vague on Facebook about family betrayal. And suddenly, I was the villain in a story I didn't even know I was writing. I'm 34, and until recently, I lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Austin. I worked my way up from nothing, community college, 2 jobs, nights without sleep. No one handed me anything. My parents helped where they could emotionally, sure, but financially? That was never on the table. They struggled their whole lives, paycheck to paycheck, and I learned early not to ask for more than they could give. So when I finally signed the papers for my house, a modest 3-bedroom on the edge of the city, it felt like I had crossed some invisible finish line. I remember sitting alone in the empty living room that first night, eating takeout straight from the box, thinking, I did this. This is mine. That feeling lasted exactly 2 weeks. It started with a phone call from my mom. Casual at first, asking about the house, the neighborhood, if I had met the neighbors yet. Then her tone shifted, just slightly. You know, she said, your father and I have been talking, things are getting harder here. Their rent had gone up again. My dad's hours at work had been cut. Medical bills were piling up. I listened, of course I did. I'm not heartless. These are my parents. Then she said it. We were thinking, maybe we could stay with you for a while, just until we get back on our feet. A while. I leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. I knew what a while meant. In my family, it never meant temporary. I don't know, Mom, I said carefully. I just got settled. I need some time to think. She didn't push. Not then. But over the next few days, it wasn't just her anymore. My dad called. Then my sister. Then even my cousin, who I barely talked to, suddenly had opinions about what I owed my parents. They sacrificed everything for you, my sister said. And now you can't even share your house. That word, share, stuck with me. Because I knew it wouldn't be sharing. It would be giving up the life I had just barely managed to build. So I made the call. I'm sorry, I told my mom. But you can't move in. There was a long pause. Then that silence. And everything changed after that. The first real crack didn't come from my parents. It came from my sister, Emily Carter. And when Emily decides you're wrong, she doesn't argue. She builds a case. She showed up at my house unannounced on a Saturday morning. I had just poured my first cup of coffee, still in sweatpants, trying to enjoy one of the few quiet weekends I'd had in months. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, arms crossed, jaw tight, I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. So this is it, she said, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. This is what you chose over Mom and Dad. I closed the door slowly, already feeling that familiar knot tightening in my chest. Emily, don't start. Oh, I'm starting, she snapped, turning around to face me in the middle of my living room. The same room I had once sat in, feeling proud and peaceful. Now it felt like a courtroom. She looked around, taking it all in. The new couch, the mounted TV, the framed photos I had just started hanging. Must be nice, she muttered. All this space, just for you. I exhaled. I worked for this. And they didn't, she shot back immediately. You think they didn't work their whole lives to raise you? That's not what I said. But that's what you're acting like, she said, her voice rising. They're drowning, and you're sitting here protecting your guest room like it's some kind of treasure. That word again, guest room. Like it was just sitting there, waiting to be filled. Like it didn't represent something bigger to me. You don't get it, I said, trying to stay calm. It's not about the room. It's about boundaries. Emily laughed, sharp and humorless. Boundaries? Since when do we have boundaries in this family? And there it was. The real issue. In our family, boundaries were seen as rejection. Privacy was selfish. Independence was suspicious. Growing up, nothing was ever really mine. My room was shared space. My money, if I had any, was family money. Even my time belonged to whoever needed something. I didn't realize how much that had affected me until I finally had something that was truly my own, and suddenly, everyone expected access to it. They won't leave, Emily, I said quietly. She frowned. What? If they move in, I continued, they won't leave. You know that. She hesitated, just for a second, and in that moment, I knew she understood exactly what I meant. But she shook her head anyway. So what? They're your parents. That's what family does. We take care of each other. I am taking care of them, I said. I've been helping with bills for months. I'm just not giving up my home. Her eyes narrowed. You mean you're not willing to sacrifice? The word hit harder than I expected. Maybe I've sacrificed enough already, I said, before I could stop myself. Silence filled the room again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was heavy. Emily stared at me like she was seeing someone new, someone she didn't particularly like. Wow, she said softly. You really have changed. Or maybe, I replied, I finally stopped being the person everyone expected me to be. She grabbed her bag, shaking her head as she walked toward the door. Don't be surprised, she said, not even turning around, when you realize what this decision is going to cost you. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time since I bought the house, it didn't feel like a safe place anymore. I thought things might cool down after Emily left. Give it a few days, maybe a week. Let everyone breathe, let the emotions settle. That's how conflicts usually worked, right? People say things they don't mean, then time smooths the edges. I was wrong. By Monday morning, my phone looked like a battlefield. Missed calls, dozens of messages, a couple of voicemails I didn't even want to listen to. The family group chat, something I had muted months ago, was suddenly alive again, and my name was all over it. At first, I tried to ignore it. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter, opened my laptop like it was just another workday. Emails, deadlines, normal life. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the chat. Big mistake. You should be ashamed of yourself. After everything they've done for you, this is why people say success changes you. That last one stuck with me. Not because it was new, but because it sounded like something my mom would say. Then I saw her message. We didn't raise you like this. Short, simple, and somehow worse than all the others combined. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading that one line. It didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed, and that hit deeper than any accusation. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. What was I even supposed to say? That I loved them, but not enough to give up my space. That I wanted to help, just not in the way they demanded. There's no clean way to say that without sounding like the bad guy. So I didn't reply. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work. I needed to think. I ended up driving without a real destination, just letting the roads outside Austin carry me somewhere quieter. Eventually, I pulled into a nearly empty parking lot near a small park I used to visit back when I couldn't afford much else. I sat there in the car for a while, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. And then, like it always does when things get quiet, the past started creeping in. I remembered being 16, watching my dad come home after a 12-hour shift, shoulders slumped, too tired to even eat dinner. I remembered my mom stretching every dollar, skipping things for herself so we wouldn't go without. They did sacrifice. A lot. But I also remembered something else. I remembered how every decision I made had to pass through them. What I studied, where I worked, who I dated. Every choice came with expectations and consequences if I didn't meet them. Love in our family wasn't exactly unconditional. It was tied to obedience. And now, for the first time, I had made a decision that went against what they wanted. And this was the cost. My phone buzzed again, pulling me out of my thoughts. A text from my dad. Not a paragraph. Not an argument. Just one line. I guess we know where we stand now. I leaned back in the seat and let out a slow breath. Because the truth was, I didn't know where we stood anymore. All I knew was that whatever this was, it wasn't going away. The next escalation didn't come through messages or phone calls. It came in the form of something far more deliberate. They showed up. I got home late that Thursday evening, mentally drained after forcing myself through a full day at work. I remember pulling into the driveway, noticing a car I didn't recognize parked along the curb. For a second, I thought maybe it belonged to a neighbor. Then I saw them. My parents were sitting on my front porch. 2 suitcases rested beside the door. I just sat there in the car, engine still running, staring at the scene like it didn't belong to my life. Like I had pulled into the wrong address by mistake. But I hadn't. This was my house. My driveway. My problem. I turned off the engine slowly, my hands suddenly feeling heavier than they should. When I stepped out, my mom looked up first. Her face lit up, not with joy exactly, but with something close to relief. There you are, she said, Standing up like this was completely normal. We were starting to think you'd be late. I didn't move any closer. What is this? I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. My dad stood up too, adjusting his jacket like he was preparing for a conversation he'd already rehearsed. We talked about this, he said. Things got worse faster than we expected. That's not what I asked, I replied. I pointed at the suitcases. Why are you here? My mom's expression shifted, just slightly. We didn't have anywhere else to go tonight. That sentence hit hard. It was designed to. I could feel it. Right there, the pressure building again. Not loud this time. Not aggressive. Just heavy. Emotional. Strategic. You didn't call, I said. We tried, she answered quickly. You didn't respond. I almost laughed at that. After everything that had happened over the past few days, that was the angle? So you just decided to show up? I asked. My dad stepped forward, his tone firmer now. We're your parents. We shouldn't have to make an appointment to come to our son's house. There it was again. Not my house. Our son's house. I felt something shift inside me at that moment. Something quieter than anger, but stronger. You can't stay here, I said. The words landed between us like something fragile breaking. My mom blinked. What? I meant what I said. I continued, forcing myself not to look away. You can't move in. We're not talking about moving in, she insisted quickly. Just a few days. Until we figure something out. I shook my head. No, because a few days turns into weeks. Then months. And then what? My dad interrupted, his voice rising. We become a burden? The word hung in the air. I didn't answer right away. And that silence said everything. My mom's eyes filled with tears. I can't believe this, she whispered. Standing here like strangers, asking our own son for help. You're not asking, I said quietly. You're forcing it. That was the wrong thing to say. My dad's face hardened instantly. No, he snapped. What's wrong is that we raised someone who thinks helping his parents is being forced. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't back down. I'll pay for a hotel, I said. As long as you need. I'll help you figure things out. But you're not staying here. For a second, no one spoke. Then my dad let out a short, bitter laugh. A hotel, he repeated. That's what we are to you now? Guess you can check in and out when it's convenient? That's not. Save it, he cut me off. He grabbed one of the suitcases. My mom hesitated, looking at me one last time like she was hoping I'd change my mind at the last second. I didn't. And that was the moment something in her finally broke. Come on, my dad said to her, his voice cold now. We're clearly not welcome here. They walked past me without another word. I stood there in the driveway, listening to the sound of their car door closing, the engine starting, and then fading away down the street. The house behind me was quiet. Still mine. But it didn't feel like a victory. The house felt different after that night. Not empty, just hollow. I walked back inside, closed the door, and stood there for a while in the quiet. Same walls, same furniture, same space I had fought so hard to protect. But something had shifted, like the air itself carried the weight of what had just happened. I told myself I did the right thing. I repeated it in my head like a fact, not an opinion. You set a boundary. You offered help. You didn't abandon them. But logic has a way of losing its strength when guilt decides to show up uninvited. I barely slept that night. Every little sound in the house felt louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. At one point, I even thought I heard knocking, soft, distant. I got up, checked the door. Nothing, just my own mind, refusing to settle. The next morning, I woke up to a message. Not from my parents. From my aunt, Linda Matthews. I hope you're proud of yourself. No greeting. No context. Just judgment, clean and direct. I didn't reply, but more messages followed throughout the day. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions. Old family friends chimed in like they had a front row seat to something they barely understood. Word had spread, and the story they were telling wasn't mine. According to them, I had kicked my parents out. I had chosen comfort over family. I had forgotten where I came from. No one mentioned the calls. The pressure. The fact that I had offered to help, just not in the way they demanded. That part didn't fit the narrative. By the afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything. Work emails blurred together. I reread the same sentence 5 times and still couldn't process it. So I did something I probably should have done earlier. I called my mom. It rang longer than usual. For a second, I thought she wouldn't pick up. Then, click. Hello. Her voice was quiet. Careful. Hey, I said. My throat felt tighter than I expected. Where are you? There was a pause. At a motel, she answered finally. Your father found a place not too far from here. A motel. Not even the hotel I had offered. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. Because, she said slowly, we didn't want to feel like we were asking for permission again. That stung. I wasn't asking you to ask permission, I said. You said no, she interrupted gently. Not angry, not loud, just final. And that somehow made it worse. I'm still willing to help, I insisted. I can cover something better than a motel. I can. We're fine, she said. The way she said it made it clear they weren't fine, but they weren't going to accept anything from me now. Not after what had happened. I didn't mean to hurt you, I said quietly. I know, she replied. Another pause. But you did. We sat there in silence, both of us holding on to words that didn't seem to matter anymore. Your father's not taking this well, she added after a moment. I closed my eyes. Yeah, I figured. He thinks, she hesitated. He thinks you've decided you don't need us anymore. That hit deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't true. But I didn't know how to prove that without undoing everything I had stood my ground for. I still need you, I said. It sounded small, almost like a kid saying it. She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Then why does it feel like you pushed us out of your life? I didn't have an answer for that. And for the first time since all of this started, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing and doing the right thing weren't the same anymore. The call with my mom stayed with me longer than I expected. Not just the words, but the pauses. The things we didn't say. The quiet way she accepted what had happened, like she was already adjusting to a version of life where I wasn't fully part of it anymore. That's what kept bothering me. Not the anger, not the judgment from the rest of the family. It was that shift, that distance. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. So I did something I hadn't done since this whole situation started. I went to see them. The motel was about 20 minutes outside Austin. One of those low, faded places you barely notice when you drive past. The kind of place people end up in when things aren't going well, and they know it. I sat in my car for a minute before getting out, staring at the peeling paint and flickering sign. This wasn't where my parents were supposed to be. When I knocked, it was my dad who opened the door. For a second, neither of us said anything. He looked older. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed. Like the past week had taken something out of him. What are you doing here? He asked finally. I came to talk, I said. He hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. The room was small. 2 beds. A little table in the corner. My mom was sitting there, flipping through something on her phone, but she looked up the second I walked in. There was that same expression again. Relief mixed with something more guarded now. Hey, she said softly. Hey. I stood there awkwardly for a moment, not sure where to put myself in a space that clearly wasn't meant for 3 people trying to fix something this complicated. I shouldn't have let it get this far, I said. My dad leaned against the wall, arms crossed. But you did. I nodded. Yeah, I did. Silence. I didn't come to change my answer, I added quickly. I meant what I said about the house. I saw my dad's jaw tighten immediately. But, I continued, before he could interrupt, I also don't want this, whatever this is, to be how things end up between us. My mom glanced at him, then back at me. Then what are you saying? I took a breath. I'm saying I'll help you get a place. Not temporary. Something stable. I'll cover the deposit, a few months of rent, whatever you need to get back on your feet. My dad shook his head almost instantly. We don't want your money. It's not about that. It is about that, he cut in. You think writing a check makes this better? No, I said, trying to stay steady. I think it helps solve the actual problem. The problem, he said, his voice sharp now, is that our son won't let us live with him. And there it was again. Same argument. Same wall. This isn't just about a place to stay, I said. It's about control. It always has been. That landed harder than I expected. My dad pushed off the wall. Control? You think we're trying to control you? I think, I said carefully, that you're used to things being a certain way. And now that they're not, it feels like I'm taking something from you. My mom spoke this time, her voice quieter. We're not trying to take anything from you. But you are, I said. You're asking me to give up my space, my routine, my life, because that's what's always been expected. That's what family does, my dad snapped. No, I replied. That's what our family has always done, and I'm trying to do something different. The room went still. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue again. But instead, he just looked at me, really looked at me, and something in his expression changed. Not completely, but enough. You really won't let us move in, he said. Not a question this time. No, I answered. A long pause. Then he exhaled slowly, like he was letting go of something he'd been holding on to. I don't like it, he admitted. I know. I don't agree with it. I know. Another pause. But, he hesitated, glancing at my mom. I guess that doesn't mean I get to decide it anymore. That was the closest thing to acceptance I was going to get. For now, my mom reached for his hand, then looked back at me. Help us find a place, she said quietly. I nodded. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But for the first time since this all started, it felt like maybe we weren't completely falling apart. It took 3 weeks to find them a place. Not something fancy, not even close to what I imagined for them at this stage in their lives. But it was clean, stable, and, most importantly, theirs. A small one-bedroom apartment on the north side of Austin, in a quiet complex with peeling paint and an old oak tree out front that somehow made the whole place feel less temporary. I handled most of it. The applications, the deposit, the first 3 months' rent, just like I promised. My dad didn't say much during the process. He showed up when needed, signed what had to be signed, but kept a certain distance, like he was still figuring out how to exist in this new version of our relationship. My mom tried more. She called occasionally, asked small questions, kept the conversations light. Safe. Like we were both carefully stepping around something fragile that could crack if we moved too fast. The day they moved in, I helped carry boxes up the narrow staircase. It wasn't a lot. They didn't have much to begin with, but every item seemed heavier than it should have been. Not physically, emotionally. At one point, I found myself standing alone in their new living room, holding a lamp my mom had kept for years. I remembered it from our old house. It used to sit in the corner near the couch where we'd all watch TV together. Back when things were simpler. Put it by the window, my mom said gently from behind me. I nodded and set it down. We worked in silence for a while after that. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just different. When everything was finally inside, my dad wiped his hands on his jeans and looked around the apartment. Well, he said, it's something. It wasn't praise, but it wasn't rejection either. I'll cover utilities for a bit too. I added, not sure if I should. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. All right. That was new. No argument. No pride getting in the way. Just acceptance. My mom walked over and hugged me. Not tight. Not emotional. Just enough to say something words couldn't quite handle yet. Thank you, she said. I hugged her back. Of course. My dad didn't hug me. Not that day. But as I was heading for the door, he spoke. You didn't do this the way I would have, he said. I turned. I know, I replied. He nodded once. But you didn't walk away either. That was the closest thing to approval I'd heard from him in weeks. Wasn't planning to, I said. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile. And just like that, something eased. Not fixed, not forgotten, but shifted. That night, I went back to my house, the same one that had felt hollow just a few weeks earlier. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and paused. The silence was still there, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. I walked into the living room, sat down on the couch, and looked around at the space I had fought to keep. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel like I had chosen between my life and my family. I had just redefined where one ended and the other began. And maybe that was always going to be messy. Maybe it was always going to hurt a little. But as I sat there, in a house that was finally mine in every sense of the word, I realized something I hadn't before. Setting boundaries didn't mean losing people. Sometimes, it was the only way to keep them. A month later, things didn't magically go back to normal, but they stabilized. I started visiting my parents every Sunday, not out of obligation, at least not entirely, but because I wanted to. That was new. Before all of this, time with family often felt expected, scheduled, automatic. Now it felt chosen. The first few visits were awkward. We'd sit in their small living room, the same one where that old lamp now stood by the window, and talk about safe things. Groceries, weather, my mom's new neighbors, my dad's job hunt, careful conversations, measured words, like we were all learning a new language and didn't want to say the wrong thing. But over time, something shifted. One Sunday, my mom made dinner. Nothing fancy, just the kind of meal she used to cook when I was a kid. The smell hit me the second I walked in, and for a brief moment, it felt like stepping back into a version of life that no longer existed. We sat down to eat. Halfway through, my dad looked at me and said, "This place, it's not bad." I nodded. "It's a good start." He didn't argue. That was progress. Later that evening, as I was about to leave, he walked me to the door. That hadn't happened in years. "I've been thinking," he said, hands in his pockets, eyes not quite meeting mine. "About what you said. About doing things differently." I waited. "It's not easy," he admitted. "Feels like I'm letting go of something I thought was just how life worked." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I get that." He looked up then, finally meeting my eyes. "But I see now," he continued, "that you weren't trying to push us away." I didn't say anything. "I just didn't like how it felt," he added. A small, honest statement. And somehow, that meant more than an apology. "I didn't like it either," I admitted. That earned a short nod. Then, after a second of hesitation, he put a hand on my shoulder. Not a hug. Not quite. But it was something. "Drive safe," he said. On the way back to my house in Austin, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. We hadn't fixed everything. There were still things unsaid. Still moments where the old patterns tried to creep back in. Still that underlying tension that might never completely disappear. But we had changed something fundamental. Before, our relationship was built on expectation. Now, it was being rebuilt on choice. And that made all the difference. When I got home, I didn't feel that old heaviness anymore. The house wasn't just mine because my name was on the paperwork. It was mine because I had defined what it meant. And somehow, in doing that, I had made space for my family too, just not in the way they first expected.